Every day, new vulnerabilities surface, and armor cracks. Complacency and idling takes over, and time is on their side. In the case of the United States, it can be hard to find the cracks, but again, as with most all threat actors looking to exploit a system, time's on their side. Critical US infrastructure is potentially weak to attack, and it's not if, but when we will see an attack that becomes our cyber Pearl Harbor. This term was used by former U.S. Secretary of Defense Leon E. Panetta, and to describe cyber as the new frontier. It's a synonym for several destructive cyber attacks on critical infrastructure in the country. We don't know where, or when, or even how many events may occur that lead up to calling an event of this magnitude. But to live up to a day we will never forget, it won't be good. When it comes to infrastructure, there are various weaknesses and different kinds, meaning physically and digitally. You may have heard of government plans or bills to revitalize the physical parts, like roads and bridges. But what about the digital parts of it? How vulnerable is it, and how can we protect it? It's possible that most of us haven't put too much thought into it, and it doesn't really come up in day-to-day conversation. It's the overlook of public officials and the ignorance of private citizens that has helped contribute to the major faults in U.S. infrastructure, digitally of course, in cyberspace. One of the biggest and potentially riskiest parts of U.S. infrastructure is the energy sector. The U.S. electrical grid contains thousands of both private companies and public sector utility providers that overlap in their offerings. And you better believe computers are a very important part of keeping the lights on. Pun intended. One may even assume that these companies may even be connected to each other via their networks. Business-to-business communications and connections between competitors normally wouldn't make much sense, but because electricity is such a public safety concern, maybe those connections exist. At least those of the public sector could be connected to other public programs, potentially. Lots of technological architecture in industries of supply and logistics, energy, or even water treatment is dated and older. That's not to pick on those industries in particular, as everyone wants the latest technology and greatest processes. However, it's been demonstrated that some of these places still use very, very dated legacy technology. Interestingly, these legacy systems may actually protect these devices. Say, for example, that today, there are pieces of an electrical grid that are on a network, but designed and implemented 30 or more years ago. The tech is primitive to today's standards, of course, but it's highly effective and it's serviced the industry very well. They still are serviced and work as intended, much the same way as a Piper airplane from the 1960s would fly well today. But there are certainly faults, and companies rightly would seek newer and more modern technology. These systems may have been left to degrade over time, or simply have not been upgraded. That may be due to simple oversight, re-strategizing, or deregulation from a policy perspective. Think of that one Windows XP machine that's still running in an office because it costs too much time to take it down and replace it. Now multiply that by 100 or 1,000 for their network. Now, if you take that to a national scale, you might have an idea of the legacy systems that could still be running. Of course, these companies want to upgrade their infrastructure to today's standards using modern operating systems and even IP technology if it's not present. But in fact, upgrading or bringing these systems to today's standards may have unintended consequences. As these control systems are brought into modern areas, they may actually be more accessible to an attack. While almost no threat actor would be able to navigate or exploit the legacy system for a lack of understanding, or if it was too simple to be made effective to be used against, it's now on a more familiar platform. It's reasonable to expect that these system upgrades will continue through the decade, especially as 5G networks become more widespread. These networks allow for capabilities with Internet of Things devices, so it'll be much easier to onboard them to a network in this fashion. Technologies like smart meters in homes and businesses, smart grids for managing voltage fluctuations, you can see where that could lead, and remote monitoring will have to be safeguarded constantly. 5G can be explored much more, as well as its security implications in a later video. Let's look at how a scenario like the title may be possible. In 2007, the DHS sponsored a cyber attack, an experiment if you will, that was conducted at the Idaho National Labs. In this attack, the researchers simulated taking control of a digital or mechanical interface that controlled the circuit breaker of a diesel generator. Then they rapidly opened and closed the circuit with a simple program, kind of like a loop, and within 3 minutes the unit was destroyed. It's simple to extrapolate these consequences on a larger scale, and this event took place almost 15 years ago. And don't get me even started on Stuxnet. To know what the effects of an attack on one of these systems may be like, one does not have to look far. In a 2015 paper, the executive director of the EMP Task Force on National and Homeland Security commented an estimate that a 30-day blackout of the nation's energy grid could result in up to a 90% mortality of the US population. Without power, supply chains would collapse, mass starvation, disease, and societal collapse would cause incredible damage. Now that's pretty dark stuff. Let's look at something a little bit more in scope and recent. The recent winter storm in Texas from February cost an estimated $195 billion. Of course, not all of that may be as a result of a loss of electrical power. If, for example, and likely one of the worst case ones, a power grid were held for ransom in a cyber attack, the results could be devastating. You may be wondering, what's being done about these issues? Well, every president since Obama has been vocal of the problems in American infrastructure, including most recently Biden, who just this month has made nominations for his cybersecurity team. One such government agency overseen by that team is the U.S. Cyber Command. Founded in 2009, its operations are highly confidential. If the nomination is any indication of how the activities in Cyber Command may play out, it's, quote, all offense and no defense, end quote. Collaboration between the public and private sectors have also been initiated to prevent any kind of cyber Pearl Harbor from taking place. These orders date back to 2013 in the Obama administration, including the process to share information and identification of infrastructure at the greatest risk. This includes the formation of the ISACs and the creation of the Traffic Light Protocol, or TLP. More recently, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency was founded in 2018, after its role was elevated from the National Protection and Programs Directorate under President Trump. The expected role of CISA is to improve cybersecurity across all levels of government, coordinate security programs with the U.S. states, and improve the government's cybersecurity protections against private and nation-state hackers. CISA was most recently tested in the SolarWinds compromise in December of 2020. We'll cover these details in a later video. I want to take a moment to acknowledge a lingering piece of cybersecurity and cyber attacks. When it comes to these attacks, especially against a sovereign state, there's no written method or law for how they should be dealt with, short of the restoration of the service, of course. Let me explain. In the cyber realm, it can be difficult to distinguish between a criminal act and an act of war. Attribution can be very difficult as anonymity increases on the internet, even such that an attacker could spoof a nation-state which was not responsible for the attack. This complicates any kind of cyber attacks or warfare exponentially. So, let's address the accuracy of the term Cyber Pearl Harbor. The term Cyber Pearl Harbor has actually been around for more than 20 years. Analysts and officials have had this analogy for decades, and we are yet to see an effect of the sort of scale of a Pearl Harbor. Of course, this is a good thing, but does it challenge the use of the term in the long term? Maybe a more serious focus would be to look at the smaller attacks that add up over time. These become the 1,000 cuts that bring down the country. For example, one source stated that, quote, while officials and experts worried about cyber terror attacks against the World Trade Center, Al-Qaeda plotted to bring down the Twin Towers with box cutters and airplanes, end quote. Additionally, nation-states have not yet brought the nation's power grid to its knees, but have attempted to interfere in presidential election proceedings. This may make you think that we're being misled. And maybe we are. A publication from the CATO Institute gives a great one-sentence summary. In quote, the whole point of a cyber Pearl Harbor is that we would not miss the significance of such a major catastrophe, since it would lead to an inevitable reconstruction of the cybersecurity threat environment, end quote. And as the Director of National Intelligence stated in 2015, quote, that the cyber domain is dominated by espionage and represents a wider intelligence contest demonstrates the continuing misapplication of strategic thought surrounding cybersecurity violations, end quote. Maybe the term is better used as an awareness term. It draws the attention of any American, and maybe rightly so, to potential cyber threats. The best part about awareness is it helps to prevent potential faults and failures that could make an attack successful in the first place. This could mean denying attack vectors through system and network hardening to prevent intrusions, and anything is easier to do with more people on your side. Still, the hyperbole of this term over its decades of lifespan can still have a negative effect on cyber operations. As Earl Nightingale said, "We become what we think about." And if all we think about is doom from an offensive cyber operation and the militarization of those operations, we in effect make these doomsday scenarios more instead of less likely. For now, there's no telling when, how, or what kind of an attack may occur. We have no historical answer because no such attack of complexity on critical infrastructure has ever occurred. In the meantime, all we can do is harden potential points of entry, speculate for any potential risk, and both physically and digitally protect our critical assets.